Marvelous hello, friends and loved ones! As we dive into almost 10 years of me being on YouTube, there's one game that longtime viewers may have noticed I've brought up a few times here and there, particularly when I'm looking back at the previous year of video games. The long-awaited SpaceVenture should be on the horizon. Honorable mention to SpaceVenture, because I'm really not sure if that's coming out this year or not. The long-awaited SpaceVenture continues to be long-awaited. And then, of course, there's SpaceVenture, a game I've mentioned wanting to play since my first start of the year video back in 2016. And SpaceVenture almost finally came out, but then didn't. Sadly, they were delayed from 2021 to 2022. I have always tried to highlight my excitement for SpaceVenture. Obligatory yearly SpaceVenture mention. Rooter from SpaceVenture, which isn't actually out yet, but it did finally get a Steam page up, so I'm counting him. But I don't think I've ever really taken the time to explain exactly what SpaceVenture is, have I? Well, to get to that, we have to go back in time to Scott Murphy and Mark Crowe, aka the two guys from Andromeda, who used to work at Sierra, makers of some of the most famous and infamous adventure games of the 80s and 90s. This duo was primarily responsible for giving us the Space Quest series, the sci-fi comedy epic adventures of goofy purple-sleeved janitor Roger Wilco. The 6 Space Quest games were just some of the many Quest titles in Sierra's library, which also included, but wasn't limited to, Kings, Police, Eco, For Glory, and The Colonel's Bet. The two eventually parted ways with Sierra and even with each other before getting back together to make a new game. Unfortunately, they don't own the rights to the Space Quest series. I'm not actually sure who does right now. I think it was Activision, and maybe it still is, but don't quote me on that. So the two guys from Andromeda decided to make a brand new game called SpaceVenture rather than Space Quest, and took to Kickstarter to raise funding for it, with the project launching on May 8th, 2012, where it bypassed their goal of $500,000. Now, I'm not sure if SpaceVenture was the first instance of, fine, if we can't make a new entry in our own series, we'll just make a new series, but we all know it certainly wasn't the last. In fact, fellow Sierra creators Lori and Corey Cole, makers of the Quest for Glory series, also funded and launched their own spiritual successor in the form of Hero U: Rogue to Redemption. Now, despite the fact that I've been looking forward to SpaceVenture for over a decade, I have to confess that I wasn't a backer on the original project. By the time I'd first heard about it, the campaign was long since over, but thankfully, in a 2013 Steam Train playthrough of Space Quest 4, Danny was kind enough to give them a name drop, and I'd been following the project ever since.
But now they've done an extremely successful Kickstarter, and will be releasing a new game.
Oh, really?
Yeah, along these lines. Not exactly Space Quest.
What was their Kickstarter called?
I believe it's called SpaceVenture.
Oh, I didn't
is
know
the name
about
of
this.
it. Yeah.
But I was able to show my own form of support by buying the Five Nights at Freddy's clone tie-in they did for the game, Cluck Yeager in Escape from the Planet of the Poltroid in 2015. That's right, I gave them $3 whole. They did eventually release a completed 1.0 build for Kickstarter backers in September of 2022. However, the game only officially launched for the public on Steam in early access on April 1st, 2025, with a planned full release later this summer. I will say that even though it's in early access, the game is fully playable from start to finish, so it's absolutely worth picking up in this state. They're mostly just using this access period to get some public feedback and potentially address a few leftover bugs and fine-tune a couple things here and there. Now, to make a second confession, not only did I receive a copy of the game from the developers to make this video, I was actually fortunate enough to take part in playtesting the game last year to help find some bugs for them to work out before the official launch. It was honestly a really cool experience, and I thank all the folks from Andromeda for the opportunity. So yeah, let's address the big thing right now. The Kickstarter was successful in 2012, but the game is only coming out now in 2025. There were a lot of development issues, bugs to fix, and at one point they basically started the entire game over to get it running on a different engine. This was a long development period. However, I'm not here to talk about the lengthy or complicated history of the game's development, I just want to talk about the game. I'm going to try not to cover the big spoilers, but consider this a general warning. We play as Ace Hardway, a space plumber as opposed to a space janitor, and I like this character. At first he just kinda seems like a gruff-talking, blue-collar bozo, but we do learn a bit more about him through his interactions with other characters. Like, he's actually a massive nerd for old-school video games. There's one scene where he's talking to this hot alien waitress gamer girl, and you can just tell that nobody, including Ace himself, is 100% positive if he's trying to flirt with her or not, and it's just really awkward and way too relatable. Like, I've been Ace in this situation, which may be why I'm drawn to him as a character. I'm not gonna pretend that Ace is this super deep, three-dimensional figure with a compelling character arc or anything, but I'm also not gonna pretend that he needs to be for this type of game and story. You're playing a 5-hour comedic sci-fi point-and-click adventure, and for that purpose, he's a legitimately fun vessel for the ride. Joining Ace is his robot dog sidekick Rooter, who not only serves as his toolbox and occasionally playable character himself, but acts as Ace's inventory system. I'm always a big fan of when adventure games do this and have some sort of logic or explanation as to how your physical inventory works. Rooter, being a robot dog who is a goodest good boy, definitely gives SpaceVenture a few bonus points from me right off the bat. Our quest in space starts with Ace working on a routine job to fix a life support system on a space station called the Nostradamus. Only it turns out that the station has been experimenting with alien life, and one of those experiments has escaped. I actually really love the puzzle where you learn this information because Ace needs to get past these murderous Roombas. So in the lab, you have to open up all the tubes to reveal the different experiment stages. Opening the 4th tube to reveal the escaped creature also uncovers the remote to deactivate the Roombas. Like, obviously from Ace's perspective, that remote was just on the table the whole time, but I like how an inventory item you need is only revealed to the player by them taking action to reveal narrative context. Like, I really enjoyed that. Ace eventually defeats the grotesque experiment and gets away from the space station before it blows up. But unfortunately, destroying a several billion buckazoid space station, or much more likely his company van, is enough to get Ace fired.
Well, maybe I fire you first. How about that? I'm firing you as my boss.
So he vows to go into business for himself, which he never actually does for himself. It's weirdly rushed, but while Ace is getting a ship put together with parts he found out in the scrapyard, his buddy Scraps just kinda launches Ace's entire business for him, and even sets him up with clients, the first of which being the two guys from Andromeda, Mark and Scott. There's actually a whole thing about them relaxing with tropical drinks and enjoying not working on their new game while the system is down, and seeing as how SpaceVenture took 13 years to come out, I'm still trying to determine if this whole bit aged really poorly or insanely well. You decide and let me know in the comments. Ace learns about their upcoming game, which, by the way, is just the entire Five Nights at Freddy's clone I talked about earlier within the confines of SpaceVenture itself. You do have to play it, but don't worry, like most of the arcade sequences in this title, you can totally skip it if you just want to focus on the pointing and clicking parts. But their game does tie into the main plot of SpaceVenture, which is the upcoming release of a VR game system called the Facebox, and how that seems to tie into an AI program called iMom, voiced by none other than GLaDOS herself, Ellen McLean. Speaking of the voice actors, I definitely want to take a moment to highlight some of them, because there's some real talent on offer here. Aside from Ellen as iMom, you've got Rob Paulsen, Maurice LaMarche, Rob Paulsen, John Patrick Lowry, Rob Paulsen, and Ed Kelly as the narrator. Sadly, Gary Owens, who was the narrator in Space Quest 4 and 6, passed away while this title was in development, and SpaceVenture actually has a really nice tribute to him.
I became operational at the Altman Institute in beautiful downtown Burbank, stardate February 12, 2015. My instructor was Mr. Owens, and he taught me to be very, very sarcastic. Would you like to hear more sarcasm?
Ed still does a really nice job though, and manages to capture a lot of that Owen-esque tone and snark, which is a good fit for this type of adventure game. There's also this one character named Veronica, who I wanted to like, but the game just left me with more questions than answers about her. Ace first meets her as he's leaving the two guys from Andromeda's house, where she's pretending to be the head of their HOA. But then later, she's also that hot alien waitress I mentioned earlier, and then she shows up toward the end to reveal she's been a special secret agent who's been following Ace the whole time because... reasons? She doesn't really do anything cool or useful though, so it's kinda conflicting for me because I wanted to see her do something cool or useful. I also want to give special mention to Officer Quicksilver, who is clearly a T-1000 parody whom we're introduced to through a lengthy scene of him dancing to his own theme song, Bad to the Chrome, and you'd expect him to have this tough, threatening voice, but nah, he's a villain with this super sweet Midwestern Minnesota accent, and it was just great.
Oh, jeez. Look at the time. I gotta roll.
The game is absolutely loaded with funny dialogue and little cameos that I enjoyed seeing, with some of my favorites being the MST3K robots in Scraps' living room, or the familiar-looking off-duty Space Ranger at the bar. By the way, the bar might just be my favorite location in the game. The dive atmosphere with colorful neon signs honestly reminds me a lot of some of my favorite watering holes that I've spent way too much time in. It's honestly kind of a shame that you don't really get to do much at the bar. It's not even really part of any puzzles or anything, it mainly just serves as a meeting spot for Ace to check in with his drinking buddies. Speaking of puzzles, I don't want to go too into them because that's half the fun of these types of games, but there is some good stuff on offer here, like needing to refill the biofuel tank on Ace's ship at a Taco Nova, a surprisingly fun outer space taco chain, to needing to repair a desert hydration station by wading through a sandworm's guts. SpaceVenture is a blast, with a lot of fun set pieces, characters, and inventory items. It's charming, funny, the puzzles are mostly enjoyable without feeling too frustrating, and the story, while not delivering an amazing epic, also doesn't really feel like it's trying to. This is a game meant to evoke the feelings and emotions of those classic Space Quest titles, with the original creators back at the helm to make us laugh all over again. It brings in just enough modern sensibilities, like immediate retries upon death, and none of that "you didn't pick up an invisible shard of glass half an hour ago, so now you can't beat the game" type stuff. I don't see SpaceVenture lighting the world on fire in 2025, but I'm glad it's finally here and that everybody has a chance to play it. I think it does a good job of accomplishing what it set out to do. It's not trying to be a mass market appeal game, but a very personal project from the guys from Andromeda, bringing us a new title in their distinct style. It feels like they made a game that they themselves would want to play, and if other people happen to enjoy it, that's just gravy. I know I did. The only big thing about SpaceVenture is that at the end of the day, I feel like every nice thing I could possibly say about this game, and I like to think I have done that, all feels like it's followed with an implied, but it shouldn't have taken 13 years to come out. If the question is, was it worth the wait? No, absolutely not, even though I did really enjoy it. If they tell us SpaceVenture 2 is coming in 2038, I'm gonna start punching people in the stomach. And for the record, I do hope we get a SpaceVenture 2, especially since, without spoiling too much, the game ends not on a cliffhanger, but in a way that certainly leaves things open for more ventures down the road. Like, maybe giving Veronica a chance to actually do something, bless her eager little heart. Scott Murphy and Mark Crowe and everybody else who worked on this game clearly put a lot of love and care into it. I hope the game does well and they aim to do more in the future, but for now, yeah, SpaceVenture, the game I've brought up on this channel for nearly a decade, is finally here, and I'm happy to say that I enjoyed it. Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good game.
Wow, really? That's how we're wrapping this thing? Okay.